As I stepped into the courtroom, the weight of every humiliating memory I'd endured pressed down on me, but nothing prepared me for the sight of my mother. She leaned back in her chair, a smirk curling at the edge of her lips, subtle but full of that smug superiority I had known all my life. My father, sitting beside her, shook his head slowly, a silent reprimand that cut deeper than any word could. In that moment, I felt the old sting of invisibility, the years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated, all condensed into their quiet gestures. Every glance from the other side of the room seemed magnified, and I could almost hear the unspoken judgment echoing, "You'll never amount to anything." My palms were clammy, my heart thundering, but beneath the fear and anger, a strange sense of clarity settled in. This was the stage I had been preparing for, the moment my silence would finally have weight. I straightened my shoulders, reminding myself that nothing here was new, just another scene in a story I already knew. But this time, the ending would be mine. Even as I stood there in the courtroom, my mother's smirk burned into my memory. I couldn't help but be pulled back to the earliest moments that shaped this tension. I remembered my 8th birthday, the glow of excitement I felt as I blew out candles on a cake meant for me, only for my parents to fawn over my older sibling's new bicycle, ignoring my carefully chosen presents. Every achievement seemed to matter less if it wasn't theirs to celebrate. At school, when I brought home good grades, they nodded politely, barely glancing up from their conversation. But when my sibling excelled, the praise was loud, elaborate, almost performative. I learned early that love in our house was conditional, measured in achievements and approval I could never quite earn. Even simple family dinners were lessons in comparison, my opinions dismissed as insignificant, my efforts minimized. These memories came rushing back, each one a quiet humiliation that had piled up over years, shaping me into someone who had learned to observe more than participate. And yet, despite the pain, I had grown resilient, patient, and sharp, all qualities I would need for what was coming next. Over the years, I worked harder than anyone could see, pouring every ounce of energy into building a life they could never acknowledge. I stayed up late studying while they celebrated my siblings' minor victories, took extra shifts at work while my efforts at home went unnoticed, and quietly managed responsibilities no one else wanted. Birthdays, holidays, and milestones became invisible checkpoints. I was always present, but never truly seen. I sacrificed my time, my comfort, even my happiness, all for a family that measured me by what I wasn't, rather than what I accomplished. Loneliness became my constant companion, but I wore it like armor, learning to keep my achievements to myself to avoid the inevitable dismissal or belittlement. Even moments that should have been shared, triumphs were met with indifference or criticism. And slowly, a quiet resentment began to take root. By the time I reached adulthood, I had mastered the art of invisible effort, silently accumulating strength and strategy that would one day turn the tables on those who had spent a lifetime underestimating me. It happened on a day that should have been ordinary, a family dinner that I thought would pass like any other. My parents casually mentioned the distribution of my late grandmother's inheritance, tossing numbers around as if I weren't even in the room. When I asked a simple question about my share, my mother laughed so quietly it could have been missed, but I caught it, and it cut sharper than any scream. My father shook his head, muttering about how I had never contributed enough to deserve anything substantial. That was the final straw. The same family that had ignored my sacrifices, belittled my accomplishments, and dismissed me for years now attempted to erase me from a rightful legacy. The humiliation of being spoken about as if I were invisible, coupled with the crushing injustice, ignited a fire I could no longer suppress. I realized that keeping quiet any longer would only let them continue their pattern of disrespect. That night I sat at my kitchen table, documents and notes spread before me, and made a decision. I would fight, legally and strategically, for the recognition, justice, and vindication I had been denied for a lifetime. Once word of my intentions leaked, the reactions I expected and feared arrived almost immediately. Friends shook their heads politely, offering hesitant sympathy but suggesting I pick my battles, or let it go, as if enduring humiliation quietly was the only acceptable option. Even my siblings, who I once thought would understand the years of neglect I endured, smirked or rolled their eyes, whispering that I was overreacting or aiming too high. The subtle mockery stung more than outright cruelty, because it came from people I trusted to see me. In quiet moments, I felt the familiar gnaw of self-doubt creeping in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had misjudged. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to follow through. But that uncertainty was short-lived. I reminded myself of every overlooked achievement, every invisible sacrifice, every moment I had been dismissed as inconsequential. Each doubt they cast only sharpened my resolve. I would prove them wrong, not for their approval, but for myself. Their whispers became fuel, and with every mocking glance I felt my determination solidify. No one would dictate my worth again. Late nights became my sanctuary, the hum of my laptop and the soft rustle of papers replacing the voices that had belittled me for years. I pored over old bank statements, property deeds, and family correspondence, piecing together a trail of neglect, favoritism, and financial oversight that no one had thought to document. Each signature I uncovered, each hidden clause I discovered, felt like a small victory, proof that I had been preparing for this moment without ever realizing it. I drafted letters, consulted legal resources online, and created meticulous spreadsheets, not for anyone else to see, but to ensure I had an unassailable foundation when the time came. The thrill of quietly assembling evidence, of knowing something my parents could never anticipate, sent a shiver of anticipation through me. With every page I printed, the power dynamic began to shift in my mind. I imagined the moment they would realize their arrogance had finally trapped them. I allowed myself a small, private smile, feeling for the first time in years a sense of control and inevitability. This was no longer about fighting for recognition. It was about executing a strategy that would finally demand they acknowledge the consequences of their actions. When the hearing began, I could feel every eye in the courtroom on me, but my focus was on the evidence I had spent weeks preparing. As I presented the first documents, the judge's eyebrows rose slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the weight behind my claims. My mother's smirk faltered for a brief second, replaced by a flicker of unease, while my father's head shook more emphatically, disbelief etched across his features. I could almost hear the words they hadn't spoken, the silent questioning of how I had gathered this information, how I had anticipated every loophole they had assumed would protect them. The satisfaction of watching their carefully constructed composure crack, even slightly, coursed through me. A quiet but powerful vindication. For the first time, I wasn't just their overlooked child. I was competent, strategic, and unafraid to claim my place. The courtroom, a space I had once entered with dread, became a stage where my careful preparation spoke louder than any insult or dismissal they had ever thrown my way. That small victory fueled the momentum I needed, hinting at the larger reversals yet to come. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for the next session, memories surged unbidden, sharp and unrelenting. I remembered the times my mother had insisted I just didn't try hard enough, even when I had stayed up all night perfecting a project or studying for exams. My father's quiet sighs of disappointment always followed, making me feel small and incapable, though the truth was that I had exceeded expectations countless times. Birthdays blurred into a haze of favoritism, with every gift or praise lavished on my sibling while I was left to wonder why my efforts were invisible. I recalled the subtle manipulations, the sly comparisons, the insinuations that I was ungrateful or that my dreams were unrealistic. Each insult, each moment of erasure, had accumulated over the years, crafting an invisible wall between who I was and who they claimed I could be. Sitting there, I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but now it fueled clarity instead of doubt. Every memory reinforced the injustice I had endured, highlighting not just personal pain, but the systematic disregard that had defined my upbringing. And as these recollections settled around me, the courtroom's silence felt almost protective, as if it were giving me space to gather the strength I would need for the battles ahead. The moment the hearing resumed, the tension was almost tangible. My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, a quiet smirk lingering as if to say, "You'll never win this." My father's voice was calm but dripping with condescension. "Are you really prepared for this, or is this just another one of your overreactions?" I could feel the old sting of being underestimated, the familiar weight of their judgment pressing down. But this time, it didn't shake me. I responded calmly, "I've prepared thoroughly. Every claim I've made is backed by facts and evidence. Inside, my heart raced, a mix of adrenaline and long-buried anger fueling me. As I laid out the first points, I imagined every dismissal, every insult they had ever thrown my way, and turned it into precision, letting my words and documentation do the work they had refused to recognize for years. Each time my mother opened her mouth to interrupt, I countered with clarity, patience, and poise, letting the courtroom see what they had never acknowledged: a capable, intelligent, and unwavering person who had been underestimated for far too long. Their disbelief was palpable, and with each carefully delivered point, the balance of power began to shift. When the moment came, I felt a quiet thrill as I reached into my folder and revealed the document they never expected me to have. It was a series of emails and financial statements that directly contradicted their carefully rehearsed denials, evidence of favoritism, manipulation, and financial mismanagement stretching back years. My mother's smirk froze, her lips parting slightly in disbelief, while my father's hands trembled as he shifted in his chair, trying to maintain a facade of composure. The courtroom felt electric. Every eye seemed to widen, absorbing the weight of what I had just presented. Internally, I felt a mix of vindication and adrenaline, knowing that years of meticulous preparation had led to this exact moment. The whispers began, jurors exchanging glances, the opposing counsel flustered. But I remained calm, letting the evidence speak louder than any argument they could muster. For the first time, I saw them reduced to shock and panic, stripped of their control. I could feel the audience's FOMO, sensing what they had underestimated for so long, and I allowed myself a private, satisfied smile. The scales had tipped, and I was finally holding the power that had been denied to me for years. When the final ruling was read, the room seemed to hold its breath. My parents' faces, once smug and composed, crumpled in real time. Every carefully hidden detail of their favoritism, manipulation, and attempts to erase me from my rightful inheritance was now laid bare for everyone to see. The judge's voice echoed in the silent courtroom as he enumerated the evidence, each point punctuating the reality they had tried so hard to deny. My mother's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief, while my father slumped forward, his head shaking in a silent admission of defeat. I sat back, my pulse racing, absorbing the weight of their downfall. Years of dismissal, humiliation, and emotional neglect had finally led to a moment of justice so complete it felt surreal. The whispers and glances from family, friends, and onlookers reinforced the power shift, a visible acknowledgement that I had outmaneuvered them at every turn. In that instant, I felt the culmination of years of invisible effort, quiet planning, and unrecognized achievements manifest into a moment that was undeniably mine. Their public exposure wasn't just satisfying, it was transformative, and for the first time, I felt the true meaning of vindication. After the courtroom emptied and the murmurs faded, I found a quiet corner and let myself breathe. The tension that had coiled in my chest for years began to unwind, replaced by a profound sense of clarity. I thought about every insult, every overlooked achievement, every quiet humiliation that had once made me feel small and invisible. Now they felt like stepping stones, each one shaping the resilience, patience, and strategic mind that had brought me here. I allowed myself a small, private smile, savoring the knowledge that I had achieved justice without losing my dignity. There was no gloating, no need to rub the outcome in their faces. The victory itself was enough, solid and undeniable. In that stillness, I realized that the most powerful reversal wasn't the public humiliation I had orchestrated. It was the quiet, unshakable growth within myself. For the first time in my life, I felt fully seen, fully capable, and fully in control of my own story, and that awareness settled over me like a warm, unspoken triumph. In the days that followed, the dynamics of my family shifted in ways I had long anticipated but never fully imagined. Conversations became cautious, smiles forced, and the casual dismissals that had once defined our interactions disappeared entirely. My parents no longer held the unspoken power to belittle or control me. Their influence had been decisively curtailed. Justice had been delivered, tangible and irreversible, and I could feel the quiet satisfaction of vindication settling deep within me. Yet beneath that triumph lay a bittersweet current, memories of what could have been, of a family that might have embraced me instead of undermining me, lingered. I understood that some relationships could never fully heal, that love and resentment often coexist in uneasy proximity. Still, I carried forward a newfound strength and clarity, knowing I had honored my worth and preserved my dignity. The past could not be erased, but I had reclaimed my narrative, leaving behind both the pain and the empowerment it had given me. Sitting alone that evening, I let the events of the past weeks wash over me, and a quiet understanding settled in my chest. I had learned that self-worth isn't granted by others. It's claimed, defended, and proven through persistence and courage. Resilience isn't just enduring hardship, it's transforming it into strategy, insight, and strength. Justice isn't always immediate or loud. Sometimes it's the quiet accumulation of preparation, patience, and unwavering belief in your own value. I reflected on the long years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, and realized that every insult, every act of favoritism, and every small humiliation had built the foundation for this moment. I was no longer defined by their judgment or approval. I was defined by my actions, my intellect, and my moral clarity. As I rose from my seat, the evening light spilling across the room, I felt an unshakable peace, a cinematic sense of closure. The story of my struggle had transformed into a story of triumph, and for the first time, I could step forward fully, knowing that I had reclaimed not only my inheritance, but my dignity and my life.